welcome back to the Generous Justice Curriculum video series. This is week 3. I'm Tim Latham. I've been getting to come into your homes each week, and this week I'm bringing with me our pastor of local and global engagement, Rich Sylvester. And I'm very glad that Rich is here to talk about justice in your neighbor this week. So thanks for being here, Rich.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And thanks for getting your haircut for us. You had a special experience with your haircut yesterday.
Thanks for bringing that up, Tim. Yeah, I went to Supercuts. First haircut I paid for in 12 years, and went home and redid it. So, yeah. Sorry,
great.
Supercuts.
That's probably true. Yeah, exactly. We just lost a lot of sponsored money. Well, so first of all, I'd like to do a brief recap of what I got out of chapter 4, Rich, so that you can tell me where I'm right and where I'm wrong and help everybody else out. I really liked this chapter of Keller's book. It started off with Jesus, him talking about how Jesus tried to convict all the religious leaders of their sin by showing how impossible the law standard of righteousness is. When he was talking about he kind of got into the parable of the Good Samaritan by talking about the expert in the law who came up to him and he said, "Who is my neighbor?" And that's what framed off this whole parable of the Good Samaritan, which is really important to Keller and really important to our concept of justice. Obviously, he talked about the Good Samaritan, which we talked about, or we might talk about, but we've talked about on Sundays. And he quoted Jonathan Edwards, and I just wanted to read this quote because I thought it was unbelievable. "We don't wait until we are in extremity before doing something about our condition. So why should we wait until our neighbor is literally starving before we help?" Which I just found extremely challenging. And then Keller uses Edwards as he kind of goes into explaining the good parable, but more into kind of explaining people's concerns and questions about the parable and critiques of the Good Samaritan. Then Keller talks about the Great Samaritan and talks about how strategic it was for Jesus to, when he was talking to a Jewish man, to make the Jewish man in the story the victim by the roadside as opposed to the person who helped him. And so he really wants this man, or wants us vicariously through this man, to feel like we're the victim. And so, like, what would you do if you were down and out and the only chance you had for help was someone who had every right to just walk by you because of the way you've treated them? Because that, like, I think what Keller's saying, like, that's what Jesus is saying, is that we are that person who is down and out, but Jesus is a better Good Samaritan, or as Keller puts it, a Great Samaritan. So that was kind of what I took from this chapter, especially. So now I want to ask you, what was your main takeaway from this chapter?
Yeah, I had a good time reading about, who is my neighbor here in chapter 4. I think one of the things that struck a chord with me, is that I find that I can be pretty judgmental at times about my neighbor. Working in different scenarios, whether it was living in Honduras or working with welfare families in New York City or even here in Williamsburg, I think sometimes I fall into the trap of looking at somebody's shoes or the car they drive or the clothes they're wearing, and I make a value judgment about what condition they should be in or what condition they may be in, without actually getting to know the individual and seeing this is the true condition that they're in. I remember working in Honduras and having kids come to my gate asking for food, and I'd think, well, you're wearing a brand new Yankees cap you just bought in the market, and not only do I dislike the Yankees,
right,
but I'm thinking, you want food, you just bought a new hat. Or working with kids in New York City and seeing that they're wearing $250 Air Jordans, and wondering why is it that they're in this condition, and thinking, man, they should be making better decisions, and realizing in essence how judgmental I am when I do that, and wanting to think through the reality that I don't know what their reality is. I don't know what condition they're really in. I don't know their story, their background, their life history. And so I was reminded in Keller's chapter here that as I look to my neighbor, as I look to the needs around me, I need to be less judgmental up front of what their economic, what their relational, what their emotional, spiritual situation is, and really get to know the individual and see the deeper, truer story than the outside front that they give me.
Well, that's a great point. I think that's what Keller wants us to take away, at least initially, we really should have started this segment off with like misinterpreting the question and said really bad neighbor stories. Like I could have told a story about how like when my neighbors growing up, like they had these pit bulls and they like chased my brother down and I locked my brother outside because my brother was too chubby and didn't get inside in time. But that probably would have been distracting for the study. So the second question I wanted to ask you is, one thing that Keller always does in each of these chapters is he uses a lot of scriptural passages to explain what his points on this topic are. So which of the scripture passages from this chapter really stood out to you, and why do you think that was?
Yeah, I think obviously the Good Samaritan scripture passage is the keynote scripture passage of this chapter. But I liked when Jonathan Edwards referenced burden bearing, bear one another's burdens. And I thought even the word burden is a pretty important word there in that scripture passage, because working alongside others, trying to actively engage in justice and mercy ministries means that we're going to take on some sort of burden. And I think sometimes we don't want more burdens than we already have. We don't want to deal with more junk than we're already dealing with.
We usually want less.
Yes, we want to get rid of our burdens. But the scriptural truth is bear one another burdens. And I think that in bearing one another's burdens, it gets dirty and messy and sometimes difficult, but I think that's what we're being called to. So I really like Jonathan Edwards' reference to bear each other's burdens. And I think that that's an important concept as we think through our neighbors.
So, Jonathan Edwards is a pretty smart guy by all accounts. So anytime we get to quote him, that's probably a good thing. Last question for this section, Rich. What final thought would you like to leave with our small groups as they go forth for the group study this week?
Yeah, Tim, I was thinking that through as I read, and I put a big star next to a section here, and I said, big takeaway. On page 70, it says, Edwards responds that when you say, I can't help anyone, you usually mean, I can't help anyone without burdening myself, cutting into how I live my life. I think if I want to take away something myself, and if I want everybody doing this study, wherever they are, to take away something, it's that when we say, I can't do that, or I don't know how to do that, or I'm not sure if that's a good idea, in essence, we may be saying, I don't want to do that because that's too sticky and too messy. Yeah. And I think just having that in the back of our mind, that when we see somebody on the street that we walk by that we know needs some help, or there's somebody in our neighborhood that we know needs our help, or there's somebody in our own family that we know needs our help, and we think, well, I can't do that, just to re-ask ourselves, is it that we don't want to do it or that we can't do it? And if we don't want to do it, why is it that we don't want to do it? And if there's some way that we can work around that, then I think it'd be really beneficial for us as a takeaway to ask the right question.
That's just a great point for us to end on, that we can really feel challenged to identify why we don't want to help if we don't want to help.
Yeah, and Tim, I'm not saying that in every situation we are able to help, but I think it's a good question for us to ask ourselves to really get to the motivation of what may be stopping us from helping, but knowing that in some situations we may not be able to do everything for everybody.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rich, for coming and sharing your wisdom on this topic with us. And now we're going to turn it over to the individual small groups. We did kind of a broad overview, but now it's your turn to really dig down in the specifics and take some lessons and discuss what Keller's talking about in this chapter. So I'll be back next week. Rich will be back in a couple of weeks, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Great time.